Welcome everyone to the week one, I guess, Monday, post-week one edition, Monday, September 8th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Barley. You can follow me on Twitter at JB Fantasy Sports. Alongside me every Monday here, Jake Letarski at RotoJake. I think that this couldn't have been a better week one overall experience. Not a lot of critical injuries, offense overall, some surprising instances, and we capped off the night Sunday with the Bills-Ravens, which might be already an all-time game having week one. We had amazing catches. We had some instances of surprise in the Colts-Dolphins game in particular. I have some egg in my face that will take quite a while to wipe off, and I think overall some waiver wire pickups that matter because we didn't expect or foresee these circumstances, and far less to do with critical injuries, which is typically what we're all looking for from a fantasy perspective. So I'm excited to kind of dive into all this here. Jake and I'll be talking about our top 5 waiver wire pickups each. We have a list broken down, but for those of you listening along for the first time, we'll also go in depth over each position as well too throughout the show. So we'll start first with the guys that you need to pick up right away, and then we'll get into a bit more of a deep dive of the position itself. So Jake, let's kick things off right away. I think this player conveniently was also the headliner of our YouTube show, that the facelift or sorts for our video itself, but Keenan Allen. It's worth noting that when we do this show, we're looking at the players 50% and under rostered on Yahoo. He literally is right on that threshold. Yep. For a lot of people, Keenan Allen probably doesn't qualify for this, but let's just talk about the veteran for the Chargers.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I was going to put him at number 1 of my top 5. That feels a little bit cheating because we're doing 50% ownership on Yahoo. And of course, we talked about him at length last week. But all the points we made about Keenan Allen last week definitely hold true into week one. You can see the chemistry there with Herbert. And he looks like his old self. You know, his side stints don't matter. He's back to his old self with the Chargers. He looks healthy, and that is excellent. I don't think anyone expected 34 pass attempts from Justin Herbert. That's definitely going to be on the high end of what we see for him in the Chargers all year. And it's also interesting that he was third in snap share behind Ladd McConkey at 84%, Quentin Johnston at 81%, Keenan Allen checked in at 61%. What he did with those snaps was the most effective fantasy stat line among all of these Chargers receivers. And I think, the pass catching volume for him gives him a high floor. And obviously we saw a little bit of touchdown upside. So Keenan Allen probably leads things off here. If we're sticking to that 50% rule, we might have to go maybe a little bit different.
We won't spend too much time on it. I think it's just one of those, I almost put it in the article, and maybe it's only available for the first month of the season. Just a stupid check, as in make sure your league mates aren't stupid and this guy is somehow available. You could apply that to Quentin Judkins, Keenan Allen. I think there is a Trevor Lawrence as well in my article that were right around the 50% threshold. For most leagues, this does not qualify, right? I think most leagues, Keenan Allen was drafted, especially once he signed with the Chargers.
Exactly.
But this is a stupid check for a lot of people out there.
And if your league drafted before he was signing, because it was a later signing, that's why he kind of headlined last week. And you definitely need to make sure that he's not left out there after this week. He's worth a roster spot in just about any format.
My number one player, and I think was consequentially available, was Hollywood Brown, that at least as of the article that I was writing in the podcast that we're doing today was about 28% rostered on Yahoo. There aren't many leagues on Yahoo that allow pickups post Friday. So we'll have seen the result of the Chargers-Chiefs game. People might remember, oh yeah, this guy got 16 targets in that loss to Los Angeles and Brazil. Oh, and then games happen Sunday, Monday. Okay, Tuesday's way. Oh, that's right. That guy played on Friday. So this is really important, I think, for everyone out there, again, listening. At only 28% roster, there's a lot of leagues, deeper leagues that I play in, where he was already drafted. That we have the Xavier Worthy injury, which we assume he'll be out at least week 2, if not longer. Rashee Rice suspended. You can like the Tyquan Thorntons of the world. You can acknowledge the Taylor Swift-Travis Kelce combo will allow Kelce to get a few more catches. Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, is going to be a volume guy for this offense. And yes, Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes can zag a little bit with that, but the concept of Hollywood Brown being a 10-plus target guy,
exactly,
I actually completely buy that premise.
Yeah, I'm acknowledging that there is a little bit of a short-term aspect to this because Rashee Rice, of course, will cut into that when he's back from his 6-game suspension, and as well as Xavier Worthy. He has a dislocated shoulder. Still, we're recording Monday morning. We don't know quite how much time he'll miss, but he's evaluated and he will miss some time. And yeah, Hollywood Brown, if it weren't for Keenan Allen, he would headline the list. Of course, you follow the targets. You're not going to find a guy that gets 16 targets on the waiver wire. He finished with 10 catches for 99 yards on the field for 93% of snaps. Keenan Allen is pretty much it's a slam dunk pickup in any PPR format, and you're going to have some utility for at least the next 3-4 weeks, I presume here. And then, you can always reevaluate, keep listening to our recommended pickups here after that. So yeah, Hollywood Brown, an excellent, he ran out of the slot a lot more than he has over his career. And that of course is, turned into a lot of targets and a lot of catches there. And also I saw something about Travis Kelce's like route run participation. Yeah, he scored a touchdown, but I think he was under, I forget the exact stat. It's like under 12% of the target share rate for like the first time since 2017, 2018. So yes, he got the touchdown. He ended up with a pretty good fantasy day, but he was only targeted 4 times, whereas most of that went to Hollywood Brown. Some of that might be a little bit game planny. But it's worth noting that, obviously he's getting up there in age. I'm surprised he's still playing this year after everything that's going on in his life. But his target share and overall just like participation in that offense appears to be down. Yes, Mahomes will still go to him because he trusts him, when the stakes are the highest. But as far as moving the ball up and down the field, it's not Kelce in this situation. It's Hollywood Brown with a little bit of Juju Smith-Schuster mixed in. I don't think Smith-Schuster's 5 targets, 5 for 55, right the board. I didn't even include him on the list here, especially when there's a guy like Hollywood Brown out there that is getting such a command of the target share in the offense, clearly has the trust of Mahomes, and clearly they're going to scheme him the ball. So Hollywood Brown, only 25% rostered in Yahoo, number 1 pickup in most formats this week.
I think people assume Hollywood Brown is brittle or that he's just the speed threat and that he'll be the Xavier Worthy deep threat replacement. That has not been Hollywood Brown's entire career in college. It wasn't with the Ravens. It wasn't with the Cardinals. And I think here we saw it again on Friday, 16 targets. That's not a guy that's just going to be, let's run him straight down the field and exploit the safeties. This is, like you mentioned, with the slot play as well, too, with Travis Kelce being less involved in that offense. Maybe the answer is the Chiefs find somebody else. We saw him last year in this sort of roster spot make an acquisition for DeAndre Hopkins, and that was added to the depth of the receiver core. I really think Hollywood Brown is probably the guy that I'm spending the most FAAB on this week, or the top waiver wire priority. Is there a number that you're looking at? Let's just say of a $100 budget from a FAAB perspective, where are you looking at with Hollywood Brown?
This is difficult, and it depends, of course, on team need. I think I could go $12 on Hollywood Brown, maybe up to 16. I think if you need him and you need him, you could creep it up a little bit higher. But remember that this is only a short-term utility. By the time the fantasy playoffs roll around, this target distribution for the Chiefs is going to look significantly different. And but this will get you there. If you had Worthy, for example, you would up that number. And yeah, maybe a couple other receivers that are banged up. Like we'll see how Drake London is doing, those kinds of things. But yeah, I would think somewhere in the 12 to 16 range.
All right, let's differ on our list a little bit. Again, both Jake and I put together a top 5 list of waiver wire pickups we want for this week. And somebody in the chat, again, you can watch along live here. We'll have the article posted later today on the RotoWire fantasy football side of things. It is behind the paywall, but we're going to have this all encompassing. We're going to be updating it throughout the week. So somebody in the chat's asking, so the bigger question from most leagues' perspective, you will have these guys available. Juwan Johnson or Harold Fannin, both tight ends. Juwan Johnson for the Saints, Harold Fannin, the rookie tight end for the Browns. Is there one that you value more than the other? At least on my list, it is Juwan Johnson, who ends up getting 12 targets in that loss to the Cardinals. Of course, you have Chris Olave get banged up at a certain point. Spencer Rattler did okay in his starting debut this season for the Saints. I don't know if Juwan Johnson is a 12-target guy throughout the year, but
I've seen 11 targets. I don't know if we.
Oh, well, okay,
maybe a
the data point, whatever. Either 11 or 12, does whatever. Double-digit targets. Johnson's made our list for years, Jake, while doing the course of the show because he was a touchdown threat. This is a different version of the Saints, one team that we expect to be pretty pitiful throughout the whole year, but the lack of opportunity for volume for these other receivers, I think Juwan Johnson is going to be close to a top 10 tight end play each and every week so long as he's healthy. And whether he doubles up his target total from his career or if it's just more receptions, or I don't know what this looks like, other than Juwan Johnson probably is number 2 waiver wire pickup for me this week.
Yeah, so I did put Juwan Johnson ahead of Fannin, and that's mostly because Harold Fannin from the Browns, yes, he outperformed Njoku, but he was on the field for less snaps and ran less routes, or had a less route.
Still 75% of the snaps. I want to be clear, like it's less than Njoku, but 75 and 86 was Njoku and Harold
exactly.
Fannin.
I'm not sure Fannin's going to take people by surprise anymore. I think he's a worthwhile add too, especially the Brock Bowers knee injury. he's downplaying it. He doesn't think that's a big deal, but we will see, some tight end need this week. So I put Johnson slightly ahead. They didn't really make my top 5 just because I think they're not that far ahead of replacement level when you're talking about tight end 10. Yeah, absolutely. This Juwan Johnson thing, he's mostly, most of his career, when we bring him up on the show, we call him a touchdown dependent red zone option here. But to see him get this kind of volume is certainly encouraging. I mean, right up there with Olave and Shaheed. And I mean, Brandon Cooks worked as wide receiver 3 in that game, but inconsequential role, really. I would say, Juwan Johnson is probably the third or second even pass catching option there. So that makes things interesting. He's worth an ad. I'm not really breaking the bank, though, no more than $3 to $6, I don't think.
It's interesting. The tight end position, at least when I was doing the article today, felt like the most actionable of this group. And we'll get into it, but like the Brenton Strange of the world probably qualify. Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz had good games as well in that tight end, let's just say 10 through 14 range. Tucker Kraft scores a touchdown. It felt like a lot of the tight ends overall did well. We'll have to see what George Kittle's injury status is. You mentioned Brock Bowers as well. That's going to be one that we're following throughout the week. There's a lot of fill-in replacements. It also might be these are flex plays for the immediate future, and I think the immediate future is the key part of this. Juwan Johnson probably has the most sustainable or projectable volume throughout the rest of the season, but this has been a guy that, again, career high was 66 targets when he's played the course of a 17-game season. You're asking Juwan Johnson to elevate a lot for an offense that we don't think is very good. So there'll be some weeks that I have some reservations. Still, I would roster him right now ahead of the Harold Fannins of the world. There is one more tight end that makes my top 5 list, but we'll go to your guy next year, Trey Benson, who I didn't include because he's rostered in a lot of places at 40% right now. And also really only had all of his production from one play. So I'm curious why you're interested in the Cardinals' backup behind James Conner.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of me wanting to craft the list in a manner that includes a running back because it is a very light week for running backs. This is going to be a receiver, tight end heavy show. I wanted to at least get a worthwhile running back in there. And the distribution between him and James Conner was a little bit, obviously, it was Conner. He had, 64% of snaps, only 34% for Benson. Benson got 8 carries to Conner's 12. But it's looking like, a reasonable split here. And obviously, Benson looked good on a 52-yard run. And, you could say, most of his volume came from that one run. But the fact that he can break out for a 52-yard run means that I think we'll see a changing of the guard here eventually in Arizona with the younger, fresher, maybe more versatile, escapable type back than Conner here. And obviously Conner has had his share of injury history in the past. So Benson is interesting because he's someone that I know, like I bought at auction in Stake League. Someone that
I draft him tons of places. He's at 45% best ball exposure for me with Benson.
Exactly. He's someone that I used would use a late round pick on significantly, and this is just starting to cement my feelings. So is it pick Trey Benson up and start him immediately next week? Maybe not. Probably not. However, this is a long-term play here where I think he finishes as the better back in Arizona, and right now is probably the last week we'll see him under our threshold, sitting around 39%.
Like you mentioned, the waiver wire is just going to be light at running back. Other guys that I was considering were like the Kenny Gainwells or Will Shipleys or DJ Giddens, who are all solidified as the running back 2s for the team. That's not consequential when we're talking about Juwan Johnsons of the world or Keenan Allens or Quentin Johnston. We'll talk about these receivers that could play in your lineup. I think if we're giving consequential advice for running back, it's that if you have James Conner, you need to do everything you can to trade for Trey Benson. In the same way that I'd say if you drafted Kenneth Walker and didn't get Zach Charbonnet, you need to do everything you can to make sure you have that sequence. Like I don't want to be in a spot rest of year where I'm worried about, when James Conner goes down with an injury or Trey Benson emerges, that I have lost that fantasy asset. Same goes for Kenneth Walker. So while you're at 40% rostered in Yahoo leagues, take this as a sign that if you have James Conner and don't have that backup, if you have Kenneth Walker and don't have that backup, that needs to be something that you go ahead and do, make a move, whatever that might be looking like. So that's where I'm looking at for this advice. Again, at 40% rostered, 39% rostered for Trey Benson. There's a few players that just about everywhere are at least available, and yet I don't know if I know how to react to them. So we'll start first with Kayshon Boutte, the receiver for the Patriots, who ended up having a breakout game. Now, I say breakout kind of because there were points last season towards the end of last season for the Patriots where Boutte was the team's best receiver. It was more as a deep threat, not a volume guy, and I think we could have some concerns that the Patriots offense did not look good in what was supposed to be an easy matchup against the Raiders, but Boutte is widely available, only rostered in 1% of leagues, and he has now had multiple games where he is at least a fantasy relevant discussion point for that Patriots offense.
Absolutely. He caught 6 balls for 103 yards. He tied with Hunter Henry for the team lead with 8 targets. That's one more target than Stephon Diggs. Also noteworthy, Travion Henderson got 6 out of the backfield. But also in terms of snap counts, it was Boutte at 79%. Demario Pop Douglas at 65%. Demario Douglas had a hilarious line. He scores the touchdown, but finishes with negative yards. That's another thing. And then, Mac Hollins, I'm not worried about. Kyle Williams, I'm not worried about. Stephon Diggs only had 43% of the snaps. I think he's still working his way back here. But, of course, that's another player that's on the decline of his career on a team that is getting younger here. If Boutte continues to establish himself as wide receiver 1 in that offense, he's starting to look like the fantasy player to own. And I think you can fly in and get him under the radar for only a couple FAAB dollars, and take the risk that if this continues, then you have yourself a flexible option throughout the season here.
Along the same lines, Calvin Austin, receiver for the Steelers, played 44 offensive snaps. I don't know if the Steelers are going to be one of the league's best offenses week in and week out. Was that just a weird circumstance and a motivated Aaron Rodgers against his former team in the Jets? I don't know. But what we do know is this is the defined number 2 receiver for the team. I think it ended up being Roman Wilson gets 10 offensive snaps, Ben Skronik 10 offensive snaps, Metcalf 61, Calvin Austin 44. You'll see Jonnu Smith, you'll see Pat Freiermuth, you see Darnell Washington. It's going to be a heavy 2 tight end set, but that there was another receiver clearly defined, and that Rodgers was looking Calvin Austin's way for that 470 and a touchdown. That's the same version. Is there one of Kayshon, Boutte, or Calvin Austin you'd rather roster more? Because to your point, Boutte had a 5 for 95 and a touchdown last year, and then ended week 18 7 for 117 and a touchdown against the Bills. So there is a bit more to Boutte's game at this point.
Exactly. I put Calvin Austin as kind of a quick hitter honorable mention in mine. Yeah, he caught 4 balls for 70 and a touchdown, tied in second for targets. But I still think that this is DK Metcalf's room. This is his receiving room. And I think Jonnu Smith's going to get some of that. I think Jalen Warren's going to get targets out of the backfield here. I'm not sure I would expect that as consistently from Austin, because we kind of saw what Calvin Austin did with that opportunity last year when he had his chances to function as wide receiver too. He wasn't really a reliable fantasy option. I'm not saying he took some big leap where it's for me, it's more possible that Boutte did and can be wide receiver 1 instead of wide receiver 2. So for me, Boutte at 1% was the guy that snuck in just ahead on my rankings of Quentin Johnston of the Chargers.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we'll get to Quentin Johnston here again. Just to reiterate for everyone, we're talking about our top 5 waiver wire pickups each side. So combining to be like somewhere within 8 to 10 players, I want to mention the relevant ones, which is maybe unfortunate for some people, almost exclusively receivers and tight ends. We have now talked about Keenan Allen, who's 50% rostered on Yahoo leagues, Hollywood Brown, who was 25 to 28%, and then we get to some of these other guys that are in that range. Is this the hierarchy for you? So it's Keenan Allen, Hollywood Brown, and then the Calvin Austins, Quentin Johnstons, and Kayshon Boutte's, because I think that's the right call. But there would be some argument made that Boutte should be higher of this group, or at least closer to that Brown tier.
I mean, I think I would put a $1 to $2 bid on that group as to back up your Keenan Allen and your Hollywood Brown bids. And I think I would rank Boutte first on the list, but I don't think he's that much separated from that tier here. And so I mean, Boutte I ranked as my number 3 wide receiver pickup option. Yeah. So that's where we're at.
Quentin Johnston scores 2 touchdowns in Brazil in that win over the Chiefs. Makes every catch, also plays a bunch more snaps, actually ended up playing more snaps than Keenan Allen, 1 less than Lab McConkey. So my whole argument, I put this in the article, which would be out there, I would imagine, as you guys are listening to this later today. I don't know if Quentin Johnston will catch every pass thrown his way every game moving forward. I don't know if he's going to score 2 touchdowns every week. In fact, that second one, it wasn't a blown play, but it certainly was a wide open opportunity, which is part of the Greg Roman scheme that I think was done really well. What I do know is Quentin Johnston's going to play because he's easily the best blocking receiver of that group. And more often than not, if you are out there playing, you can do what the Chargers did against the Chiefs on Friday. Zag on the Chiefs defense when they thought it was going to be a run-heavy approach. That might not be the game plan moving forward every week, but when you're playing and having opportunities to be on the field, you will be then more often than not able to get volume like we saw on Friday.
Exactly. Yeah, Quentin Johnston's going to be overbid on this week. It's just a reality, a reaction similar to Isaiah Likely week 1 last year. getting those touchdowns. But I don't think he's changed that much as a player or as his role. I mean, I'm sure you can expect some type of progression, but Keenan Allen obviously cuts into that. All that we really know from week one, the only hard fact is that they're going to stave off the rookie wide receivers from really getting a chance to get on the field. The Trey Harris, the Keandre Lambert-Smith, those guys are dynasty taxi squad players at best right now, unless an injury were to happen to any of them. And this was kind of the story on Quentin Johnston in past years. If you timed out his touchdown weeks, you got a good amount of utility from Quentin Johnston. But I don't think just because he scored twice in week one, he might score 8 to 10 times this year. But, if 20% of that is off the board already, you're going to have a lot of down weeks. And there's also the fact that, maybe it was just a game plan against the Chiefs, but Herbert passing 34 times is not what Harbaugh wants to do there. They want to run the ball a little bit more. And it was Amari and Hampton that dominated that backfield, and Najee Harris essentially a non-factor. But maybe they're just going to use the personnel they have, and when they have 3 good wide receivers capable of stretching and spacing out the defense, they're going to take what is given to them. And Quentin Johnston is a fine ad. I think he should be rostered at this point. We're not going to. I doubt we'll see him much below 50%, if at all, by this point next week. But just have to keep in mind that he's touchdown dependent. You're going to have a lot of 2 catches for 20-yard games here in between these big games. So that's why I ranked him a little bit lower on my list, because a guy like Boutte, if he gets 8 targets a game, he can be PPR utility, much higher floor on a week-to-week basis. Isn't going to really tank your lineup in weeks like the Johnston 2 for 20s might.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I think that's going to be one that we follow along with the Chargers. Again, I don't know if we're going to see a 65 to 35 pass-to-run ratio like we did on Friday, but that might have been the zag for the Chargers that helped them get that critical win in Brazil over the Chiefs. So just reiterating our list again, Keenan Allen leads the top, even though he's likely not rostered in the leagues that are listing long. Marquise Brown a bit more available. Kayshon, Boutte, Quentin Johnston. I had talked about Juwan Johnson as my tight end. Along the same Trey Benson line of running backs, Quinshon Judkins, rookie second-round pick who signed his contract, I think, on Sunday, was at 55% rostered. Dylan Sampson at 40% rostered. I don't know if I want to spend a whole lot of time, at least, on them right now, other than to say that needs to be closer to 100% for both of them. Exactly. And finally, on my list, along with Juwan Johnson, was Jonnu Smith, who I was shocked to see was only rostered in 31% of leagues. So somebody in the chat was mentioning, do you pick up Zach Ertz or Brenton Strange? I guess I would rather say, is Jonnu Smith available? Is Juwan Johnson available? And then we go further down this, maybe with Harold Fannin as well, too. But Jonnu Smith, I don't know what people are expecting. Like, yeah, it's less than a ideal circumstance like the Dolphins was last season. But Arthur Smith had so much spiting of his nose to cut off his face deal with Jonnu Smith last year. 2 years ago with Kyle Pitts or whatever it was, 3 years at this point. He's doing the same thing with the Steelers. Like I can like Calvin Austin to a certain extent fantasy-wise and still acknowledge you gave up critical draft capital to have Jonnu Smith be on the Pittsburgh Steelers. That was an Arthur Smith thing. So I think Jonnu Smith needs to be much, much closer to 50% rostered. And while it was only 5 for 19 and a touchdown, there will be volume on certain days because Arthur Smith will make sure there is.
And we'll touch on the Cleveland backfield when we get to the running back section. There's a reason I left these guys off my list, mainly that Judkins is sitting at 55% rostered right now. But speaking of the Steelers, I threw Aaron Rodgers as my number 5 pickup because, why not? He can definitely in 2 quarterback leagues. Maybe you can get some matchups out of him in single quarterback leagues. This was the lowest over-under on the slate this week, and people didn't have a whole lot of expectations for Rodgers, but at 14% rostered, he goes out there, he way outperforms the Trevor Lawrence, the Tua, even the Michael Penix, like those types of guys that he was in a tier with. He threw back the clock, 22 for 30, 244 yards, 4 touchdowns. I don't think you're going to get much, if any at all, rushing out of him, so of course that's going to limit the ceiling, but starting out with a 25-point fantasy point week, and then he's got a home game against Seattle. He's at the Patriots, home against Minnesota before an early bye. So there's a decent stretch of utility that could come from here. Fortunately, no quarterbacks went down this week, so you don't necessarily have to replace him. But I think you can do a lot better. You can do a lot worse as your quarterback too in fantasy this year. So I threw Rodgers up there as my number 5 pickup.
Look, it's been a good enough fantasy week where a lot not a lot of critical injuries occurred. That's what we like to see in situations that were resolved. Again, Jake and I went over our top 10 basically player list of that group and a few repeats, but I think very interesting from a flex perspective and receivers if you need it. We're going to go position by position and talk a little bit more in depth about a few of these guys. But first, a word from our sponsors, Chalkboard. Cash in on your NFL picks this season with Chalkboard. Simply choose more or less on your favorite player stats to win 5,000 times your money. For a limited time only, new players get $20 free with no deposit required. Yes, you heard that right. $20 free just on sign-up. See why over 1 million fans have already locked in with Chalkboard to turn their sports knowledge into cold, hard cash. Whether you're locking in the perfect slip with alternate lines, using the cash out feature to take your money and run, or hammering the daily promos, which I have been doing quite a bit, actually. It's been a lot of fun. Today's your chance to win up to $40,000 on a single entry. Stop sitting on the sidelines and get into the game with Chalkboard Fantasy Sports, now available in 30-plus states. Download Chalkboard today and use promo code ROTONFL. That's ROTONFL to get $20 free deposit with, $20 free with no deposit required. I have been doing semi-daily Chalkboard picks. We did it for Thursday, Friday, and I will have one ahead of the Bears and Vikings game tonight. We're doing a bit of the walking promo, Jake, where I'm talking about my picks and the scenic view behind me. So excited to be working with Chalkboard throughout the whole season as well, too. And looking forward to tonight's game, NFC North, as the Packers sit on top of the division right now. Let's dive into the quarterback position overall. And last week we mentioned Trevor Lawrence, which wasn't great. I actually, in our stake league, Jake, started Lawrence over Fields, which doesn't look good. But far, far worse and more consequential to me was the guy here on your left on the screen. Talk about starting Tua over a bunch of other people. Couldn't have been more wrong. I apologize to anyone I gave the wrong advice to on that. I did that same mistake myself, so at least I wore it, the scarlet letter in this case. Won't make that mistake again. Dolphins might be one of the worst teams in the league after what we saw in week 1. I don't know if there's a ton of streaming quarterback candidates. I did mention Trevor Lawrence in my article against the Bengals in week 2, but from a deeper perspective, it probably is Lawrence, and then I would say Michael Penix against the Vikings. However, we'll see what the Vikings look like tonight, again, as we're recording this before the Monday Night Football game. But Brian Flores' defense really makes me nervous against younger quarterbacks, and Michael Penix does have some warts from an accuracy perspective.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, when it comes to streamers, there's no real standout ads here this week, and Trevor Lawrence is 52% rostered, so he does have a great matchup at Cincinnati, and I would probably maybe even look to him first. But Aaron Rodgers would probably top the other streamers. He's home against Seattle. And then Penix is interesting again. We'll see how the Vikings look tonight. He's 32%, and maybe he even gets a little bit of a downgrade depending on Drake London's health. We know he's a little bit banged up with a shoulder injury here. But yeah, after that, there isn't really a whole lot for streamers. You're still going with your guy in the first couple of weeks here. Stafford at Tennessee, Tua against New England, not really. Cam Ward didn't look hot. I mean, granted, he had a tough matchup in his debut. Bryce Young did not look like a lot of people thought. I mean, Daniel Jones had an outstanding week, but now he's got the Broncos this week. So you don't really want to mess with that at all here. So I think this is a week of just kind of going with your guys, or maybe looking towards Lawrence, Rodgers, Penix to stream in that order if you have to.
Yeah, that was going to be my note real quick. Don't overreact to the Daniel Jones boom game because the Broncos defense is legit. I thought Cam Ward and the Titans did fine actually being competitive in that contest, but the reality situation is we're talking about one of the best defenses in the league going against an offense that at least prior to week 1 we thought was bottom third, and that might be a conventionally complimentary way to view the Colts, and certainly outperformed expectations given what Vegas thought the Colts would be in week 1. So don't pick up Daniel Jones and assume what happened against the Dolphins will just one-for-one replace that against the Broncos.
And then, yeah, it's a light quarterback section. You know, fortunately, there was not much carnage in the quarterback area this week. Doesn't look like anyone's going to lose their job imminently. The only things I had for 2 quarterback league notes was that Spencer Rattler looked pretty useful, and he's one that has actually been kind of available in 2 quarterback leagues. And then I did have a note. I saw pregame with the Giants. Apparently, Jackson Dart was going to have some packages designed for him, but that wasn't really a thing at all. So don't worry about that yet. I mean, if you're holding backups, I still think Jackson Dart, like if you're holding backups in a speculative 2 quarterback league, I still think Jackson Dart is probably the one that you want to hold the most. But yeah, that's it. It's Jackson Dart and then maybe Jalen Milroe if you're looking to get speculative. But but we'll see here. I mean, Sam Darnold didn't do a whole lot, so you can throw that in there. But that's all I have for 2 quarterbacks. It's really a light quarterback with no injuries, and really only Rodgers being the standout performance, because even the streamers Penix and Lawrence didn't exactly light things up in week 1.
Yeah, and I put this in the article that Penix is nearly 300 total yards. 17% of it came off of a 5-yard check down to Bijan Robinson, who really does a lot of Bijan Robinson stuff and goes 50 yards for that touchdown, which was awesome. Penix looked fine. I think you had also talked about it too, and I'll reiterate again. We're recording this on Monday. We do not know the status of Drake London. It didn't sound like it was overly serious, or at least reason to assume it's going to be a multi-week absence. But depending on what Drake London is or is not available, that complicates things as well too. Against a Vikings defense, again, that conventionally with Brian Flores as the defense corner has been very difficult for young quarterbacks. So I'm not going to overreact or start Michael Penix necessarily in week 2. Against the Vikings. Similarly to the quarterbacks, the running back position also didn't have a whole lot of juice to add to it. We had talked about Krosky Merritt last week, another egg in my face where I loved Chris Rodriguez more than Krosky Merritt at the price. Couldn't have been more wrong about that. Apologize to anyone that had followed my advice. It's been an 0-for-2 day for Joe Bartel in that regard. Ollie Gordon didn't do a whole lot for the Dolphins in bad game script. And we talked about Quentin Judkins, who signed his contract extension. There could be the possibility still of a suspension, but at this point at 55% rostered, if we are not looking at 100% rostered in week 3, people have failed us or at least not listened overall. You had Trey Benson on your top 5 list, already 40% rostered, so it's just kind of a tougher spot overall for the running back position.
Exactly. Yeah, I had Trey Benson there. He busted off the big play. I guess he passes the eye test a little more, just thinking that he'll have a change in the guard. And I wanted to put a viable running back in there because the snap share wasn't quite 60-40, but it was close enough that I think if the Cardinals offense has a good game, we'll see Benson continue to get work. But the one thing I wanted to mention was the Browns backfield. And there's a reason I left him off my list. I was going to start that way, but the distribution was very interesting. First and foremost, looming over all of this is Kayshon Judkins. And you mentioned, maybe there'll be a suspension down the road. That'll take a while to happen. But he did go ahead and put ink to paper and sign his deal. There's a chance he could be ready for week 2. If not, he'll be ready pretty soon here. He missed my list because 1, we talked about him last week. 2, after the news, he's already at 55% rostered. So then you take a look at the Cleveland backfield and what happened this week. Yep. Looking at the box score alone, you'd think Dylan Sampson was something. He technically led the Cleveland backfield because he had 12 carries for and only 29 yards compared to 6 carries for Jerome Ford. But his long was only 5 yards. The backfield really, on a whole, didn't do a whole lot. And the other thing that's interesting here with Sampson and why I left him off my list and not really wanting to pay any FAAB for him really is the fact that, Jerome Ford, although the stat line didn't reflect it, Jerome Ford had 52% of the snaps compared to 45% for Sampson. And then Jerome Ford also ran a lot more routes. Now, he wasn't necessarily targeted on those routes, but he had more opportunity. And I think if there is a split between these two in the backfield, if for whatever reason Judkins isn't really ready to go week 2, it's probably Jerome Ford. But then I think when Judkins is around, the rest of these guys are going to be drop candidates. So I'm not using a ton of FAAB on these guys. I just don't think that there's a running back to pick up if there isn't Benson. I mean, I do think if
Judkins, I think Judkins and Dylan Sampson can operate the same way that Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt did like 3 or 4 years ago during the peak Baker Mayfield, Kevin Stefanski version. Like Dylan Sampson, I have always thought was a better pass catching running back than a 3-down back, and people just got enamored with the rookie fever. Now, Dylan Sampson, again, you mentioned the volume of carries he got. Clearly, the Kevin Stefanski and company think that Dylan Sampson can do that, but when you have Quentin Judkins, you sped the second-round pick to go ahead and add that to the offense. It's not to then put that behind Dylan Sampson when you feel like Judkins is ready to play. So I think the best and complementary version of this offense is those two working in conjunction, hand in hand, much of the same way Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt did. When that happens is part of the problem with this, and it's why I do think Dylan Sampson needs to have a higher roster rate than 46%. But I don't know if by week 6 or 7 you can count on this backfield. It's one of the reasons why, like you said, maybe Dylan Sampson doesn't need to be as high as rostered, doesn't need to be something that you're actively going out if he is available somehow in one of your leagues. Before we get to the quick hitters, Jake, I wanted to just get a word from our sponsors, RT Sports. The NFL season is here, and the best place to play DFS Pick'em is RT Sports. Download the brand new RT Sports Pick'em app right now. Receive your 100% deposit match bonus up to $100 in bonus funds with promo code WIRE100, WIRE100. RT Sports offers unique ways to earn bonus funds such as Every time you share your entry slip on X, you get $5 bonus funds on RTS Sports, or if you sync your bank account, you also get bonus funds as well too. Also, RTS Sports offers weekly free square options on the app with player lines slashed to just a half total yard for different options. Download the RTS Sports Pick'em app today and use promo code WIRE WIRE 100 to get a 100% deposit match up to 100 in bonus funds. All right, the quick hitter running backs I think can also bleed into the receivers since we spent so much time talking about the receivers at the top end of this. So I think it's a much easier conversation to say guys you would drop at running back because I think we got more information on that as opposed to the quick hitters. But, I mean, Kenneth Gainwell, obvious running back 2 for the Steelers here this week.
It was shallow enough in running back this week that I could have promoted Kenneth Gainwell from a quick hitter honorable mention to an actual ad candidate, although I don't think there's many people that you'd really drop for him. Kenneth Gainwell went ahead. We expected him to be ahead of Caleb Johnson, at least early on. At least I did. I stayed pretty much out of the Caleb Johnson market. And Johnson was an afterthought. I think he only had 1 carry. It was really the backfield of Gainwell and Jalen Warren. And Gainwell actually played 4 more snaps than Jalen Warren, which is very interesting there. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of utility that came from this backfield necessarily. So you have to keep that in mind to a degree. But yeah, you just based on opportunity alone. I mean, Warren got 11 carries despite playing less snaps. Gainwell only had 7 carries and had less yards per carry than Warren. So there's that there. I mean, Gainwell only had a long of 6, but Gainwell is someone that's out there on the wire just about everywhere. And, if Arthur Smith's going to give him this kind of work early on, there might be utility there. Maybe he finds the end zone one of these weeks, and that could lead to some fantasy utility. But again, it's a light week for running backs, and there's not a whole lot. I also threw DJ Giddens on the quick hitter list, but just note that despite his touches, that was pretty much all garbage time. So I'm not really interested in getting a ton of DJ Giddens. The utility isn't really anywhere beyond a Jonathan Taylor handcuff.
And I think that's the important part of this. So if we're not going to say here's actionable guys to pick up and play right away, the part that is a takeaway for the backfield is that DJ Giddens is the clear backup. In the case Kenny Gainwell, clear backup to Jalen Warren. You had Blake Corum rise as that clear backup to Kyron Williams. Before Will Shipley was injured, Shipley was the obvious backup to Saquon Barkley. So while that isn't, I don't even know if I'm rostering those guys. It is something to talk about because when that happens, or if there's an injury that occurs, unfortunately, to somebody at the top of the depth chart, it isn't just the Trey Bensons and Dak Charbonnets that emerge in that category. I think there are more along those 4 or 5 that we just kind of talked about. The bigger deal for me is running backs that I think it could pretty obviously drop. And again, I mentioned complete egg in my face, Corey Krosky-Merritt. I thought that Chris Rodriguez would be far more of a lucrative ad relative to the price you're paying, where Krosky-Merritt was a 7th or 8th round selection towards the end of draft season. Couldn't have been more wrong about that. And in this case, Chris Rodriguez was a healthy inactive, which is equally bad. I was laughing at the people who thought Jaden Blue was going to be a consequential factor to the Cowboys' backfield because he was a healthy inactive come Thursday. Well, I got my comeuppance here on Sunday with the Commanders choosing to bench my guy, C-Rod. So not a good look in that scenario either.
Yeah, we thought C-Rod would get some goal line touches. That was not the case. That went to Bill or Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. So I think Chris Rodriguez is a pretty safe drop here. And then when you get to the drop candidates, you look at guys like Jaden Blue, who was a healthy scratch. Tootin in Jacksonville wasn't really used. Scatabo wasn't really used. But the problem is with these rookies is you weren't necessarily drafting them or taking a late flyer on them with the idea that they were going to be super great out of the gates, right? This is kind of a long-term play here. And I'm a little worried with Jaden Blue with how good Javonte Williams looked. I was not expecting that. Of course, part of that is the Eagles losing that key defensive lineman, Carter right before the game there. So that was something there. The only other one is Najee Harris. I mean, he wasn't drafted towards recent drafts anyway after the injury here, and he was essentially an afterthought there. I could see cutting Najee Harris, but would I cut Jaden Blue or Tootin or Scatabo for Kenneth Gainwell? The answer is probably not.
Right,
but you're going to cut an injured player. You're going to cut someone that didn't, maybe a veteran that didn't see the field at all for something like that. Yes. But I'm still, I'm not going to go and cut Jaden Blue everywhere just because he didn't play this week. That was always going to be kind of a long-term play here. The
only reason, Jake, you're cutting those guys is if you need a replacement for Xavier Worthy or the injuries to Brock Bowers or Drake London are a bit more extensive than you thought, or you want to try to sit on the Chris Godwin part of things, or Jordan Addison, these suspended or injured guys, a bit longer. That's the only reason, because I like Marquise Brown and Hollywood Brown a lot. I'll pick up Hollywood Brown just about everywhere that he's available, and I'll do it so with consequential FAAB part of things. But otherwise, it's more about what makes sense for your roster, and I want to keep identifying that in this conversation, because we've had a lot of week ones where it's, just roster Puka Nacua. Or I remember we keep talking about Mike Zimmer and the Vikings from years back. Justin Jefferson was cut because Mike Zimmer hated rookies. By week 3, we had pounded the table on that one. That ended up, there isn't an obvious takeaway. It's a lot like last year where Isaiah Likely was the guy to go ahead and get, and then didn't prove to be consequential throughout the course of the season. That's how I'm looking at this waiver wire for the most part, at receiver and at running back, and certainly at quarterback. The one position that I do think there's enough to kind of change for is the tight end spot. And before we get to that, let's get a word from our sponsors, Vivid Seats. NFL is back. Don't just sit on the couch. Lock in your seat this season with the Vivid Seats app, where you'll score the lowest price tickets guarantee. That's right. Vivid Seats is introducing their new lowest price guarantee, so you know you're getting the best deal all season long. Seriously, try to find a cheaper ticket. It's going to be pretty tough to do. Every rushing yard, red zone pass, jaw-dropping play from Isaac Tesla or somebody else, live and in person, you could go ahead and see it. And here's the kicker. When you buy with the Vivid Seats app, you rack up rewards and free credits. That's your personal home field advantage. And if that wasn't enough, Vivid Seats is offering you $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase with code RotoWire, ROTOWire. That's code RotoWire. Suit up at this NFL season to download the Vivid Seats app and get the best deal in the game with the best prices. Terms and conditioning apply. Again, we'll get one more word from our sponsors here from Blue Wire real quick. All right, we're back. And again, if there's one position that we can change the hierarchy of things waiver wire wise, it probably was tight end. And we had talked about our top 5 waiver wire list. Juwan Johnson was up there. Harold Fannin's up there. Zach Ertz in some places is probably available as well too. There was a lot of consequential tight ends that at least need to be mentioned of that group as well too.
I don't want to switch the order too much, but are any of these quick hit receivers you want to touch on?
Well, I wanted to mix them in. Sorry, this is. Jake and we have this whole rundown part of it. I wanted to mix them in with tight ends because I think this is actually the part of the conversation I'm most interested in. How do you rank them? Because we've done a lot of these guys that we like, but the FAAB part of it, that's that. So let's talk about the tight ends, and then we'll add in the receivers as kind of like a conglomerate mix. That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, so I mean, I still put Juwan Johnson number 1 just because of the volume. And then I mean, Juwan Johnson and Jonnu Smith are 1A, 1B.
1B, right, yes.
You sold me on Jonnu Smith. I think those guys are the top 2 that you want to look for. I probably put Harold Fannin number 3, kind of in his own separate tier. And then you're looking at guys like Noah Fant and Brenton Strange in that other tier. Because Noah Fant, I don't think we talked about, 0% rostered, caught 4 or 5 for 26 and a touchdown. It looks like he's working ahead of Mike Gesicki in Cincinnati, and that offense can be pretty powerful. So that's worth looking there too. And of course, Harold Fannin, less snaps and routes than Njoku, but not by a whole lot. Was far more efficient with that line. I'm just not sure Harold Fannin is going to take anybody by surprise with 9 targets and catching 7 of them for 63.
So like Fannin over. So we had talked about Kayshon Boutte in the top 5 list. Calvin Austin for the Steelers also in the top 5 list. I have both those receivers ahead of Fannin. But for example, Harold Fannin is a flex play over Romeo Doubs or Dontavian Wicks, either one of the Packer receivers.
So I would put part's Boutte, interesting. I'd put Boutte ahead of Fannin, but I'd still put Fannin ahead of Austin, I think.
Okay.
And
see, that's different.
I might actually put Romeo Doubs ahead of both those guys too. He's a very interesting case here that I wanted to talk about. As of week 1, we talk about the rookie weapons. We've got, Golden in there, but Romeo Doubs is still the guy Jordan Love looks at. And that's something, while we were both at the game, that, we could see when there's one-on-one coverage, Love tries to go his way, sometimes to his detriment, but he's looking at Doubs off the line of scrimmage. He's going to get the one-on-one targets. He's getting the deep shots too. And he's also, it's a very crowded group in Green Bay, but it's Doubs who had 70% of snaps. Golden had 47, Wicks had 45%, and the banged up Jaden Reed only had 38%. But I imagine that's the up and up. Now, the problem is 10 different Packers caught a pass, and Jaden Reed was the leader with 5 targets here. Romeo Doubs was tied for second with 4. But I still like Doubs in the red zone, and I still like Doubs as the guy that Jordan Love is going to go to when he's in trouble or when he sees a one-on-one coverage here. And I think, he had 80 yards just fine week 1. I mean, I used him on DraftKings because I thought Jaden Reed was maybe a little bit too banged up and, okay results there. No snowflake there at least. But Dobbs is a guy I'm interested in because I think he's a pretty consistent guy. He might be right above that replacement line receivers, but to me, he's a little more interesting than Calvin Austin.
So I wanted to do this conversation a bit more. It's why I wanted to include the quick hitter receivers with these tight end groups. Again, if we think Juwan Johnson, Jonnu Smith, Kayshon, Boutte, Keenan Allen, Hollywood Brown, they're all elevated above. There is a let's just say quartet of 4 flex guys, whether it be tight ends or receivers. Can I just make the argument that Harold Fannin probably is going to have a more defined volume and role in the offense week to week than what we assume Romeo Doubs to be? The only downside to this is if and when Shedeur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel or both go into the mix, the Browns' passing attack is a less comfortable 45 attempts that Joe Flacco had.
Yeah,
and
all of our Browns analysis goes up in a blender once
it does, and that's where I'm going. Like, I would rather have Cedric Tillman over Romeo Doubs for as long as Flacco's the quarterback. I would rather have Harold Fannin over Romeo Doubs or any of the other Packer players over like in that scenario too, because I know what I'm getting week in and week out when Flacco is your quarterback. There's lots of volume defined to Jerry Jeudy, to Tillman, to David Njoku, and Harold Fannin. That funnel is just to that group, whereas the Packers had 10 targets, and that won't change. Okay, great, you're going against the Bengals in week 4, whatever it is. There probably is a lot of offense, but I don't know if it's going to be Matthew Golden that week or Dobbs or Jaden Reed, or does Luke Musgrave go 3 for 60? That's the beauty of why the Packers offense is good, but fantasy-wise, it really hurts the people using those guys.
It's definitely tough, but I still think when it was all said and done, even over Jaden Reed, I think if you had to pick a wide receiver one out of that offense, I think the choice is becoming clearer there. But I'm glad you mentioned Cedric Tillman. I almost overlooked him. 8 targets, 52 yards, and a touchdown. He's basically wide receiver 2 or co-wide receiver 1 in Cleveland there. I mean, Cedric Tillman tied with Jeudy in both snaps, routes, and targets. And he's absolutely, worth a look, for now in the short term.
Yeah, I think the matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars here, week 2, should be a lot of offense, although we assumed against the Browns it'd be a lot of offense too, and the AFC North games just never end up working that way. So Cedric Tillman is on my list. He's also in the article that we talked about too. And then we'll double tap Washington, both KC Washington for the Falcons and Malik Washington for the Dolphins on the quick hitter super deep list as well.
Yeah, exactly. Casey Washington led Atlanta receivers in routes run and played 94% of the snaps. And Drake London is a little bit banged up with his shoulder. He's day to day. And then, you mentioned right before the show, I almost missed this. Apparently, Malik Washington ran the most routes for the Dolphins. I also want to throw in this group, maybe a slight bump above those two guys, is Trey Tucker for the Raiders. He's basically wide receiver too. He played 93% of snaps compared to 62% for Thornton. I actually added Thornton in a place where I had an empty roster spot right beforehand, right after the Cooper retirement news here. I thought Thornton might be interesting, but it was Trey Tucker. He only was targeted 3 times, caught 2 of them for 54 and a touchdown. Scoring the only receiving touchdown is interesting, but he also tied with Jacoby Myers with 37 routes run. So if we're talking wide receiver 2s, your Calvin Austin, Tillman types, I'm not sure Trey Tucker is too far off of that. But of course,
is Thornton a drop for you after looking at those numbers?
No, Thornton's not necessary. I mean, Thornton would be a drop if one of these guys, one of any of our top 5 pickups were available, I guess. Okay. But Thornton, picking him up was still kind of a little bit of a long-term play. And, he could take that role over eventually or get a little bit more use here. But for now, early season, Trey Tucker, it's been around a couple of years, seems to be the guy that they're looking to in Las Vegas.
There wasn't anything in the same way of Chris Rodriguez being a healthy and active or Jaden Blue being a healthy and active. Like, Thornton played a decent amount of snaps. The offense looked functional. Yeah, he wasn't a focal point. No one was expecting Thornton to be a focal point, but I'm with you. I would much rather drop a lot of those running backs that we had more of a defined role for. If it's in a shallower league, Hollywood Brown for Thornton, that's a no-brainer. Keenan Allen for Thornton, like you mentioned, that's a no-brainer. Yeah. But I think even in the tight ends that we talked about, Juwan Johnson or Jonnu Smith, I think I'm keeping Thornton in that sort of scenario too, depending on what your roster. We did a pretty good job with the streaming defenses last week. Of course, nobody would have expected the Colts to be as crazy as they did. But this week, it's going to be interesting as well too. So what do you have for streaming Kansas defense?
So I want to mention the Packers because they're only 46% rostered. They get the Commanders, who we agree is a pretty good offense, but it is a short week. Jaden Daniels looked good, but not exceptional, and against the defense that he probably should have done a little bit more against. And the Packers, obviously, the pass rush is well boosted with Micah Parsons around. And Micah Parsons is only going to play more snaps and he'll be more involved. He really only played on passing downs with maybe a couple others sprinkled in here. And he did get the sack here, but that was kind of late in the game. I feel like they just wanted to get him a sack. But
he wanted to get the sack, that was for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, the Packers pass rush looks really nasty with Parsons. I think Van Ness is getting better. I'll give him credit. He had a good
I thought
game.
Wyatt was really good, too.
Yes, Wyatt was amazing, getting pass rush from the interior. And, Wooten, kind of the preseason standout, he's doing good. And then, of course, Rashawn Gary is getting a lot more one-on-ones. So this Packers pass rush is quickly becoming one of the best in the entire league here. And the Packers defense is only rostered in 46% of formats. Now, the Commanders, again, have a good offense, but it is a short week. It'll be a lesser over-under here. And it is the Packers. They have this game at home, and the crowd, I will say, was electric yesterday. So they're interesting. I also noted San Francisco. They're 34%. They're on the road, but it's against the Saints here. We'll see if Spencer Rattler can do it again. He had a soft-ish matchup against the Cardinals, and I think the 49ers are going to be able to get after him a little bit more. You can throw in the Rams 27% at Tennessee, or even the Patriots 27% or 14% at Miami. But I'm really not going down that road. I think the 49ers are your streamer. Look for the Packers or the 49ers, because I think both of those could at least end your streaming situation here for a little while, because both of those are respectable defenses that you don't feel bad to start against almost any opponent.
Yeah, we'll have the streaming defenses article, I think, up either Tuesday or Wednesday. Jerry Donabean's done a great job throughout the entire past couple of years doing that. Code YouTube 15 gets you a 15% subscription off of RotoWire itself. You can go ahead and read my Waiver Wire article, which will be up there. I appreciate you guys in the comments as well. You'll be a part of the article too, because I put this overlaid in the article itself, and we update that daily. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, as more of the injury report information comes in, there will be new names added to the list. That being said, we're already like 12 deep on the article, and there's probably a few more that Jake kind of tipped me off on throughout the course of this podcast that we'll add as well too. So go ahead and check that on the RotoWire site. Again, YouTube 15 gets you a 15% off subscription to the RotoWire site itself. Lots more information overall, snap breakdown, lots more content just coming up on the site itself. So go ahead and if you're not going to listen to us or anything else, go ahead and click on at least the other content that's out there on the RotoWire site too. So that does it for us on this edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll be back in around the same time next week, and you set for the Week 3 Waiver Wire pickups that we're already here. We're through Week 1 is pretty crazy, and I think we had a comprehensive list here.
Catch us earlier now. We're definitely going to get you for the Monday commute this year. That's pretty much the goal of the change in showtime. So thanks again for tuning in, and we appreciate the audience, the active comments, all the fun stuff as always.
Thanks, guys.